Our story's events took place in Malaysia in 2017, when the death of Kim Jong-nam, the older brother of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, was announced. Kim Jong-nam died at the Kuala Lumpur International Airport, the capital of Malaysia, and the circumstances of his death confirmed it was a murder, or more precisely, an assassination operation plotted by his younger brother Kim Jong-un. But why would the North Korean leader want his own brother dead? And how could the execution of such a sinister plot be so strangely carried out? The suspects identified as being directly behind the brutal killing were two young women in their 20s, one an Indonesian national named Siti Aisyah, and the other a Vietnamese woman called Doan The Huong. The two women had never committed a violent crime before or anything even remotely close to this level of malice. By all outward appearances, they seemed like ordinary people just trying to get by in life. So how did they end up being the ones to carry out such a high-profile and controversial assassination on foreign soil? The sordid events of this story feel more like they're straight out of a gripping espionage thriller film. Welcome to a new episode of Brain Fuel, exploring the bizarre assassination of Kim Jong-nam. On the morning of February 13, 2017, the Malaysian authorities announced that Kim Jong-nam, the elder half-brother of North Korea's supreme leader Kim Jong-un, had been killed at Kuala Lumpur's International Airport terminal. The incident immediately made global headlines because this was no ordinary man whose life had been taken. This was a member of the dynastic Kim family that has presided over North Korea's authoritarian regime for over 70 years. Most of you have likely heard of the infamous Kim Jong-un, the current maximum leader of the reclusive nuclear state. But I'm willing to bet that far fewer of you are familiar with his older sibling Kim Jong-nam, who was initially being groomed as the legitimate hereditary heir to assume control of North Korea after the death of their father, Kim Jong-il. However, certain events and personality clashes within the Kim family led to Jong-nam falling out of favor and being passed over for the all-important leadership position, which was seized instead by his younger half-brother Jong-un once their father passed away in 2011. Afterwards, Jong-nam went into de facto exile by leaving North Korea and spending many years living overseas, primarily in the semi-autonomous Chinese territory of Macau. But this self-imposed isolation did not allow Jong-nam to escape the ominous specter of his younger sibling's wrath and authoritarian paranoia. From the outside looking in, the two brothers' relationship appeared to grow increasingly strained and acrimonious over the years, with Jong-nam occasionally making public statements and giving interviews that subtly criticized and subverted his estranged brother's absolute grip on power back in Pyongyang. According to one South Korean intelligence report, Jong-nam even went so far as to write a private letter directly appealing to Jong-un, asking his younger sibling to cease any further attempts to harm or assassinate him. In the letter, Jong-nam desperately tried to reassure Jong-un that, despite their fraternal conflicts, he harbored no ambitions to actively undermine or threaten his brother's entrenched status as the supreme leader of their homeland. Jong-nam stated his sole desire was simply to live out the remainder of his days in peace alongside his own family, free from the high-stakes power politics and brutality that came to define their dynastic interactions. But of course, this personal appeal for a ceasefire on assassination attempts appears to have fallen on deaf ears as far as the paranoid and uncompromising Jong-un was concerned. From his iron-fisted perspective, Jong-nam's very existence as the firstborn son of the previously dynastic lineage represented an existential threat that had to be neutralized by whatever means were deemed necessary and expedient. No matter how much Jong-nam endeavored to downplay his ambitions and present himself as a harmless relative living abroad, Jong-un simply could not abide having even a potential rival hereditary claimant to North Korea's absolute dictatorship remaining alive given the ultimate high stakes involved. So despite Jong-nam having lived in de facto exile overseas for many years by that point, the intelligence agencies under Jong-un's control persisted in intensively monitoring his older sibling's every movement and communication. They undoubtedly waited for what they perceived as an ideal opportunity to strike and permanently eliminate the potential hereditary risk Jong-nam still posed in their minds, no matter how detached from the North Korean power structure he claimed to be. That long-awaited chance for the Kim regime finally appeared to materialize in the early hours of February 13, 2017, when their targeting operations determined that Jong-nam would be briefly transiting through Malaysia's sea capital airport of Kuala Lumpur on his way to an onward destination. By exploiting this fleeting window when Jong-nam would be exposed in a semi-public third country venue, the North Korean operatives could strike in a deniable manner on foreign soil without needing to compromise their own tightly controlled territory. So in a scene eerily reminiscent of a Cold War spy thriller playing out in real life, the North Koreans deployed their two unwitting recruits Siti Aisia and Daeun Hyewon as the ones to directly implement the deadly airport ambush. Despite being complete strangers hailing from Indonesia and Vietnam respectively, the two 20-something women had been brought together months earlier by the same shadowy rifers who ensnared them into what they were deceivingly led to believe would simply be some acts of harmless video pranking for a satirical YouTube show. According to the backgrounds uncovered by investigators, Siti Aisia was a former migrant worker who had lived a hard scrabble existence even before trying to eke out a living at a Malaysian massage parlor. Meanwhile, Daeun Hyewon was a Vietnamese national who dreamed of breaking into show business as an actress or model and leaving behind the drudgery of serving food at different restaurant jobs back in her homeland. So when both young women were approached by charming but mysterious men claiming to represent an up-and-coming video production company, they jumped at the opportunity to take part as bit actresses for some quick cash, even if the roles being offered seemed rather odd or prank-oriented in nature. Over a period of months leading up to the fateful events of February 13, 2017, the two women claim they were given acting coaching and tasked with rehearsing and performing various video pranks in public settings like airports and shopping malls. This included being trained to approach strangers from behind and cover their faces or eyes ostensibly for a comedic reaction to be caught on candid camera. Unbeknownst to them, these were actually practice runs to prepare them for executing the lethal poisoning attack on Jong-nam at the airport. CCTV footage captured at Kuala Lumpur International Airport in the hours before Jong-nam's murder shows Siti and Daeun lurking separately in the terminal's public spaces, clearly tracking Jong-nam's arrival movements and waiting to implement their final act of deadly pranking. At one point, footage shows Jong-nam being briefly accosted by the two women at different times, with one coming up from behind to seemingly cover his face in the practiced manner before calmly walking away again. Within moments of this sequence occurring, however, the stunned Jong-nam can be seen emerging from the encounter in visible distress, gesticulating wildly to nearby airport staff that some unknown substance had been smeared near his eyes and mouth. The potent effects of the VX nerve agent smeared on his face soon became grimly apparent, as the footage shows Jong-nam struggling to maintain his balance and orientation as the fast-acting toxin overwhelmed his system. Despite frantic efforts by first responders to administer emergency aid, Kim Jong-nam was soon beyond saving and declared dead within an hour of initially being exposed to the deadly nerve agent. In the chaotic aftermath, the Malaysian authorities quickly determined they were dealing with fallout of a targeted assassination using banned chemical weapons on their soil. When apprehended and interrogated in custody, both Siti and Daeun claimed they had no knowledge they were handling lethal toxins, having been duped into believing they were simply performing harmless pranks for a video production team they had been working with innocuously for months beforehand. Their legal defense teams argued it defies all credulity that their clients would recklessly endanger themselves, let alone take part in carrying out a premeditated assassination, by having nerve agents smeared onto their bare hands during the airport attack. But despite the women's proclaimed innocence as supposed patsies, prosecutors pushed forward with formal charges that could potentially carry the death penalty. They accused both Aisia and Hyewon of being fully aware that they were handling lethal toxins and willingly participating in the carefully orchestrated assassination of Kim Jong-nam on behalf of North Korean principals. As the extraordinary trial progressed in the Malaysian courts, more incredible details emerged about the convoluted pathway that led the two relatively unremarkable women into carrying out such a shocking and brazen murder on foreign soil. According to their respective accounts, each had been recruited months earlier by shadowy operatives working undercover as producers for prank video shoots and reality TV-style recordings. In Siti Aisia's case, she claimed the man calling himself James who recruited her was of Asian descent but spoke Indonesian and English well. He allegedly lured her in with promises of decent pay to take part in video prank segments, having her practice doing pranks, like approaching strangers and covering their faces or putting substances on them for comedic reactions. Daeun Hyewon described a similar sequence where she was enlisted by a man going by the name Mr. Y, who spoke Vietnamese and instructed her to rehearse public pranks at locations like airports and shopping malls. Both women insisted they were constantly given assurances that the substances they handled, such as baby oil and other innocuous-seeming materials, were completely harmless and for simple prank purposes only. Their legal teams highlighted archived social media posts from the months leading up to the attack that showed the women laughing and smiling while practicing these pranks on unwitting members of the public in outdoor areas. They contended that their clients were amateur actresses simply going through perceived rehearsals for a satirical video project, with no ability to comprehend they were actually being painstakingly groomed to take part in a high-profile assassination operation. However, prosecutors countered by asserting that the women's claims of being mere pawns defied logic, arguing they must have been aware they were handling lethal chemical weapons when they ambushed Kim Jong-nam at close range. They also pointed to the suspects' suspicious behavior after the attack, such as immediately divesting themselves of contaminated clothing and belongings. Forensic evidence was also presented indicating that both women had traces of VX nerve agent on their clothing and personal effects in the aftermath. An expert witness toxicologist testified that the mere handling of such a potent nerve agent endangered the suspects' own lives, unless they had been given specialized protective equipment and training on how to work with the banned chemical weapon without accidentally exposing themselves. The prosecution's main assertion was that ultranationalist agents of the reclusive Kim regime had identified the two women as the perfect unwitting tools to deliver the lethal chemical attack, precisely because of their apparent insignificance as small-time actors and unlikely assassination suspects. By embedding them for months under the guise of a video prank operation, the North Koreans were supposedly able to capitalize on the women's naivety and use them as deniable cutouts to ambush Kim Jong-nam during his brief transit in Kuala Lumpur. In retrospect, certain telltale signs became clearer that the woman may have been groomed over time to lower their guard and suspend disbelief about their perceived roles as video pranksters. For instance, Doan testified that her North Korean recruiter Mr. Y deliberately took steps to desensitize her to the concept of targeting strangers at public venues like airports, which could seem quite unnerving to an uninitiated person at first. To acclimate her to those environments, Doan said she was initially tasked with doing what seemed like totally innocuous acts at transportation hubs, like asking for directions from unwitting passers-by while being secretly filmed. It was only after she had grown comfortable with that setting that Mr. Y gradually introduced the idea of doing more invasive pranks like walking up behind people and covering their eyes or mouths, all under the pretext that these were just acted rehearsals for an edgy prank show. The prosecutors argued that this sort of psychological manipulation and desensitization grooming was all calibrated towards setting the women up as the perfect disposable assets to conduct the airport assassination of Kim Jong-nam. By easing them through progressively more audacious violations of personal space in public, all under the guise of acting out pranks, their emotional and ethical barriers were slowly broken down over months until deploying them for the real chemical attack became that much easier. According to the prosecution's narrative, the North Korean handlers' meticulous operational planning also extended to using a different recruited woman as a backup elimination asset in case the primary assassination went awry. An Iraqi woman by the name of Basima Tusi Kadalo was allegedly enlisted under similarly deceptive pretenses before the attack, and had been traveling in the region while ostensibly waiting for her own role to activate. The prosecution accused Basima of being pre-positioned in case City ACR or Doan Phai Huong needed to be dispatched to ensure their silence about the covert operation. They presented evidence that Basima had arrived in Malaysia just days before Kim Jong-nam's murder and had held several suspicious meetings with other suspected North Korean operatives around Kuala Lumpur. Investigators recovered deleted communications on her phone that seemed to refer to awaiting orders once the plaza shooting was accomplished. While Basima insisted the cryptic messages were purely innocent references to an unrelated business deal, prosecutors insinuated they pointed towards her being primed as a cleanup contingency related to the airport assassination. Her legal team vehemently protested her alleged involvement as an elimination agent was purely speculative, especially since she had openly checked into a Kuala Lumpur hotel under her real name at the time. Nonetheless, her mysterious presence added another layer to the prosecution's depiction of a grand, intricately planned North Korean clandestine operation on Malaysian soil. As the trial unfolded over many months, scenes played out in the courtroom that could have been ripped straight from a John le Carré thriller novel. There were bombshell testimonies from professional criminals who claimed they were engaged by the North Koreans to supply equipment and materials for manufacturing the VX nerve agent on Malaysian soil. Other witnesses described clandestine meetings in anonymous hotel rooms and furtive handovers of suspect materials between multiple operatives. At one point, the trial nearly derailed completely when one of the key accused masterminds being tried in absentia released a shocking televised statement from Pyongyang. Ri Ji-yu, believed to be one of the primary North Korean agents who choreographed the airport assassination logistics, appeared on state television to publicly confess his involvement, while claiming the whole operation was an authorized decapitation, sanctioned directly by Kim Jong-un himself against his exiled brother. In the audacious propaganda address, Ri stated he had no regrets about eliminating the anti-revolutionary scum and asserted that any Malaysian authorities who continued pursuing charges related to the case could face retaliation and punishment from North Korea's military forces. The brazen statement created an uproar, with Malaysian prosecutors accusing North Korea of outrageous contempt towards their justice system's sovereignty. As the trial reached its climax in the final arguments, prosecutors pushed a narrative depicting Siti Aisyah and Don the Ishuong as merely the outermost ring in a layered Russian nesting doll of conspirators working on multiple interlocking levels. While the women may have been tricked into participating through calculated deception about staged pranks, the prosecution asserted that they were still undeniably the ones who delivered the fatal chemical weapon into Kim Jong-nam's face. Therefore, they should be convicted of his murder regardless of how masterfully they were manipulated by unseen North Korean hands into carrying out the hit at Kuala Lumpur airport. The defense teams countered that the women's documented histories and personalities made it extremely improbable they could have knowingly and willingly taken part in such a diabolical assassination plot. Siti Aisyah's lawyers portrayed her as an impoverished migrant worker who fell victim to human trafficking and was stuck in a desperate situation until the video prank job provided a glimmer of hope to earn money legitimately. Meanwhile, Don the Ishuong was depicted as a starry-eyed dreamer chasing long-shot aspirations of showbiz fame and misled by promises of earning good money as an edgy video performer. The idea that either woman could have comprehended, let alone voluntarily participated in, an outrageous international assassination using banned chemical weapons simply defied credulity given their backgrounds and circumstances. As the marathon court proceedings drew to a climax in late 2019, there were differing fates for the two defendants at the center of this geopolitical murder mystery. In a stunning turnabout after years of vigorous prosecution, the Malaysian Attorney General's chambers issued a notice of withdrawal for the murder charge against Siti Aisyah, citing insufficient evidence to prove she understood her role in the airport killing, as well as relenting to protracted diplomatic pressure from Indonesia. Prosecutors agreed to allow Siti's release and deportation back to her home country. However, no such reprieve came for the Vietnamese national Don the Huong, who remained in custody to face a potential capital sentence if convicted of Jonas Nam's premeditated murder on North Korean orders. As closing arguments reached a crescendo, her legal team delivered an impassioned plea portraying their client as a naive young performer who got in over her head through cold manipulation by calculating agents seeking her expendable services. Huong's lawyers forcefully argued that regardless of the unseen puppet masters actually orchestrating the hit, she had no conceivable motive or rational basis to willingly take part as more than an unwitting pawn based on the established evidence about her background, personality and life circumstances. To convict her of murder would be a grave injustice, they asserted, given she was merely an easily exploited bit player following perceived acting directions from her secretive North Korean handlers. For its part, the Malaysian prosecution team pushed for the court to look past Huong's proclaimed ignorance about the lethality of the chemical weapon she helped deliver. They contended that the very act of recklessly deploying toxic VX nerve agent on another person in a public setting was enough to reasonably deduce murderous intent, regardless of whether Huong understood its full killing potential or not. By willingly participating in such a noxious chemical attack, she bore culpability as an operative instrument of homicide, whether fully aware or obliviously misled by her North Korean puppet masters. After retiring to carefully weigh the voluminous evidence and arguments over many weeks, the Malaysian High Court finally issued its climactic ruling in April 2020. In a public rebuke towards North Korea's unapologetic efforts to permanently silence Kim Jong-nam, as well as the extreme nature of deploying chemical weapons on civilian soil, the court found Don the Huong guilty of murder and sentenced her to execution by hanging. However, in a postscript showing the complex geopolitical tensions underlying the entire affair, the Vietnamese government promptly issued diplomatic protests condemning the guilty ruling against their citizen. They warned of intense bilateral blowback unless Huong's life was spared, likely seeking to avoid her becoming a potential future bargaining chip between North Korea and Vietnam's one-party communist state. Under these overt political pressures, coupled with remaining doubts about how clearly Huong understood her personal role in the assassination, Malaysian authorities agreed to allow her to serve a drastically reduced federal prison sentence of just over 3 years. This judgment finally paved the way for her repatriation to Vietnam in May 2019, after an overseas incarceration that spanned over 2 years since the airport killing. What do you think? Were the two girls aware of and involved in the assassination? Or were they just two naive girls who were deceived? Write to me in the comments below. My dear viewers, here we reach the end of our story. I hope you enjoyed the story. If you liked the video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Also click the bell icon to receive notifications for new videos. The link's below in description for more details. See you in the next episode.